Alan Heavenly Body Johnson, Dutch historian Rutger Bregman, Kate Celestial McCann and Lunar Lady Grania Maguire. That's this week, BBC One after Question Time. That's the cheese, Michael.
Rachel and Bill now on BBC One. In a time of uncertainty, here's a programme we can all agree on.
Tonight we're in Belfast. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Tobias Ellwood, first elected as an MP in 2005, a former captain in the Royal Green Jackets and now Government Minister for Defence. Labour's Shadow Solicitor General for England and Wales, a barrister. He resigned from the front Labour bench in 2016 in protest at Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and was back again 3 months later. Nick Thomas-Symonds, Geoffrey Donaldson, Northern Ireland's longest-serving current MP and is Chief Whip at Westminster for the DUP. John O'Dowd has represented Sinn Fein in the Northern Ireland Assembly since 2003 and is a former Education Minister in the Stormont Executive. An ex-Chief Policy Advisor to Nick Clegg, now Chief Executive of the non-partisan think tank Demos Polly MacKenzie. Very warm welcome to our panel, to our audience here, and of course to you at home. You can argue along using hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook and on Instagram. But let's get going with our first question, which is from Aaron Rankin.
Is an extension conditional on a vote nothing more than blackmail?
And can I check, are you referring to Theresa May or to the EU?
To Theresa May.
To Theresa May. Tobias Ellwood.
This is the biggest generational decision we face, and it's one of the most complicated as well. And the Prime Minister stated last night that it's now Parliament that must decide this. We are in a minority government, and therefore Parliament has the final say on this. And if we were to ask this audience, or indeed the country, or Parliament, there would be so many different views as to what leave actually means. And that's been the difficulty all along. And this is the time now where all of us have got to ask ourselves, with the clock ticking down, what is best for Britain? What is the art of the possible? What is the answer that allows us all to step back from the positions that perhaps we want, that we desire, that we thought of during that referendum, and what can actually take us through and unite the country, not just those that voted to leave?
But coming back to the question, Aaron was referring to Theresa May making an extension conditional on her vote getting through. Is that a form of blackmail?
I don't think it's a form of blackmail. It's a reality of where we face. The Parliament voted quite firmly to say no deal is not an option. We should take that off the table because the danger that would bring to our economy, to our security, and indeed to our international reputation. If Parliament doesn't want that, it must decide what it does want. And you're going to get caucuses, groups, different parts of Parliament saying, I want a second referendum, or I want WTO. Nobody's going to get what actually they want. We have to ask ourselves, what is the art of the possible? And the deal that is on the table allows us to honour the referendum result and allows the country to finally move forward. That's what we now need to focus on. And we saw on the weekend, very interestingly, people starting to shift and recognise that if you want to avoid that no deal, we're not going to get that second referendum. There's a vote on that as well. And you even
but you're beginning to see people shifting back the other way after Theresa May last night in the Commons and then in her speech seemed to be saying it's all MP's fault. Well, it's all going so wrong.
I don't think she quite said that. There will be... I suspect that there will be a vote next week, and it is for Parliament to decide. It is for all of us to recognise, do we want the options that are getting slimmer and slimmer? Do we want to extend for a couple of years, which would take us into having elections, EU elections again? Or do we do what we do right now, require a short extension to allow us to get the legislation through? And that, I do plead with colleagues to say, let's unite, let's do what's best for Britain, let's move forward.
Nick?
I think whether you want to use the word blackmail, whether you want to use the word railroading, whether you want to use the word from last night of simple hostility to Parliament, The last few months have been entirely discreditable for the Prime Minister, and she's been entirely reckless in how she's been. And I think you start really with the general election of 2017, when the Conservatives became a minority. She could have reached out across Parliament then. She didn't. You can go back to the start of December last year, when she decided not to go ahead with the first meaningful vote. We are here now in late March. She has pursued a strategy, I'm afraid, with the European Union on the issue of the Northern Ireland backstop, which has proved an entire failure. She has not achieved any changes to it, nor was she, in a legal sense, nor was she likely to.
And do you think her deal will get through next week?
Well, it's looking very unlikely at the moment, Fiona. And let me just say in relation to that, the criticism I make is this. What she should have done, instead of chasing votes in her own party, she should have been reaching out across Parliament to find a solution that we can unite around. She is in a unique position as the Prime Minister to do that, and so far she has completely failed to do it. And we ended last night with that terrible, irresponsible statement on the steps of Downing Street that wasn't fostering consensus, it was fostering, I'm afraid to say, division.
But talking about reaching out, Jeremy Corbyn has said how he has and continues to want to reach out to colleagues across all parties to try and find a consensus. There wasn't a lot of reaching out going on last night when he walked out of a meeting at which Chuka Umunna was present. How is that reaching out?
Well, as I understand it, there was confusion about who was at that meeting. But let me just say this. Jeremy has
he could have stayed. Come on.
Jeremy, as has Keir Starmer, the Shadow Brexit Secretary, spoken to other party leaders last week. And in addition to that, Jeremy spoke to the Prime Minister for 20 minutes last time. And I'm afraid to say we can talk about meetings and who was at meetings, but the fundamental problem is you can talk to the Prime Minister unless you're blue in the face. If she continues not to listen, we'll be in exactly the same situation, and that's where the problem is.
Polly MacKenzie, so we're now in a situation where it is up to the EU. Never mind taking back control, it's up to the EU what happens next. What do you make of the situation we're in?
I think it's extraordinarily depressing and frightening. And it's not just words like blackmail that feel appropriate, but, you know, aggression and bullying and brinkmanship and partisanship, which, you know, it doesn't go back to December, it doesn't go back to the general election, it goes back to straight away. As soon as the referendum was over and Theresa May stood on the steps of Downing Street, she made this decision, which was driven by the necessity of party politics. She was a Remainer leading a party that had lots of powerful levers in. She needed to appeal to them because she was thinking about how to be the Prime Minister of the Conservative Party instead of how to be the Prime Minister of the country. And as Tobias said, you know, this is a decision that is going to shape the future of the nation for a generation or generations. And to try and take that decision as a single party, as a single group of people, is just manifestly disastrous. And I think it absolutely started this journey we've gone through from those kind of crush the saboteurs messages, the winner-takes-all movement, which then led to her losing her majority and being unable to deliver on that kind of divisive, aggressive, incredibly partisan agenda. And the big challenge for all of us, whatever happens, and I've gone out of the business of making predictions because now it feels like every single eventuality is almost impossible, but yet something's got to happen. So I'm not going to make a prediction, but what frightens me is how do you bring the country back together? Because Theresa May's approach of saying everybody must unite around me and exactly what I think, that's not unity. And, you know, we're here in Northern Ireland where we've got them sitting at the other end of the table tonight, but, you know, parties with incredibly different views. Came together, right? So I think we, came together to secure peace. And over there in Westminster, we can't get two parties to sit in a room together for more... I mean, I'm delighted that Jeremy Corbyn sat in a room for 20 minutes with Theresa May, but I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
OK, John O'Dowd, Jeffrey Johnson, I'm going to come to you in a minute. I'll just hear a bit from the audience. There's quite a few hands up now. Yes, you there in the T-shirt.
Just wanted to ask Tobias, you were saying that last week, or you said the MPs have voted quite firmly on things like about the second referendum. They also voted quite firmly that they didn't want Theresa May's deal. And the kind of logic of coming back to it again and coming back to it again because things have changed, can that logic not be applied to the public voting for a second referendum?
Well, Tobias, I'm just going to take a few questions, if I may. I'm just going to go around the audience just a little bit. So many hands up. Yes, you there in the sweater.
I'd like to say that I think you're all right that this goes back much further than this week, but it goes back much further than any of you have said. It goes back to when the plans for the referendum were first announced. It goes back further to David Cameron trying to negotiate in the EU. David Cameron made the referendum policy because he didn't want to risk losing 10 or 15 seats to UKIP. And look where it's got us. This has always been because of the Tory party playing party politics with issues that are going to be huge generational changes for all of us. I'm 16 years old. I didn't get a say in Brexit, and I won't get a say in it because there is not going to be a second referendum as things stand. But either way, I think what we have to face is that this is not an issue of parties not coming together. This is not an issue of direct democracy, a people's vote being able to solve where it failed in the first place. What we need to look at is the fact that this is all caused by a party putting itself first before the country it is trying to govern. What we need to do is not look back to a people's vote. We need to look at a further extension, and we need to solve this where it all should have started and where this could have been avoided in the first place, by going back to a general election and representative democracy, because that's what this country was built on.
Yes, I do agree that this deadline is the deal isn't put through is a blackmail on the UK. But the thing about it is, what I think is that we voted to leave the EU. We voted to leave the customs union, the single market. We voted to leave the jurisdiction of the European courts, and the Parliament's had over 2 years to find a way to find a deal to get us out of it. So the time is up on Friday the 29th. We should just leave, no deal.
Will you resign if there's no deal?
Well, look, can I just come back to...
No, just quickly answer that one, since that's the point the man was talking about no deal.
I don't think that is going to come up myself. I don't think we made it really, really clear that no deal, the damage that it would do, and many of us went out on a limb to do this, to take no deal off the table, to say that's not... In fact, we've got the extension deliberately because we're heading towards no deal.
But we could end up with no deal further down the line.
You're speculating, and I don't agree that's going to come up. I think,
OK.
But I think... May I address those, or do you want me to...
Briefly, yeah. Go on.
Very, very briefly. Really, really important points, because democracy was mentioned there, but we had a referendum. And we've illustrated the diversity of views that there are just in this room alone. And that's the challenge we face. How can we provide a solution which allows all of us to step forward and unite ourselves and move on from a country? And that's the challenge we actually face. And the deal is on the table. The written agreement actually is the basis, whether you want the Norway model, whether you want a customs union, or whether it's the Prime Minister's one. The difficulty is actually the political declaration, which is the next bit, which isn't legal. So I suggest that everybody move forward, agree this, and then allow the country to get back to what it should be doing.
John O'Dowd, let's go back to the original question. Is an extension conditional on a vote nothing more than black now?
Well, I think Theresa May is at a stage where she's using any initiative to try and get our deal across the line, because she and others have realised that it's the best deal available to them. Now, I personally believe that Brexit is going to be a disaster for the people Geoffrey and I represent. And it's just worth pointing out, Geoffrey nor I chose what end of the table to sit at. We were told where to sit. No, the common denominator between the political crisis in Britain and the political crisis on this island is the DUP. Because the DUP are in the middle of creating the mayhem. Now you know why they're are in the middle of creating the political mayhem around Brexit that's currently going on in Britain. And in fairness to the DUP, though, there is factions of the Conservative Party, there is factions of the Labour Party, and there's factions of other groupings who are using the concerns of the DUP around the backstop for their own narrow political agendas, including some of them being ambitions to lead the Conservative Party in the future. So all those things are going on. So Theresa May has now come out and made this statement. I have to say, it was a remarkable statement for all the wrong reasons last night. I listened to Theresa May talking about the responsibilities of MPs, and MPs have to get this across the line. My understanding of how Westminster work is that Theresa May, firstly, is an MP. She's supposed to be the leader of the majority of MPs in Westminster, and through her leadership, she's supposed to bring policy and direction and legislation and lead through Westminster. She has failed for all those reasons. She's failed on all those. But the people impacted by this Brexit chaos is the people Jeffrey and I represent across the board. We may have differences on the emphasis around this. We have differences around Brexit. We have differences around a lot of things. But be under no illusion, those who clap no deal, if you live here, you are going to face the worst consequences economically, socially, and across a wide range of issues from no deal.
Jeffrey Donaldson, are you going to vote for the deal next week?
Well, clearly, Fiona, we have major concerns about the proposal that's on the table at the moment. And we've made that clear, and our concerns are shared by many other members across the House of Commons. And indeed, on 2 occasions now, the deal has been comprehensively defeated. On the first occasion, by the largest ever majority for a sitting government. That demonstrates that, and I accept the point Tobias makes, it is very difficult for any Prime Minister in these circumstances to try and get a solution that brings everyone together. But you have to get a majority. And our main concern is around the proposals on the backstop. And I understand and recognise the need to ensure that we don't get a hard border on the island of Ireland. We don't want that. But neither do we want a trade border in the Irish Sea. Great Britain is by far our biggest market. We sell far more goods from Northern Ireland into Great Britain than we sell to the rest of the world, including the EU. To create a trade barrier with our biggest market would be economically catastrophic.
But that's
for
exactly
Northern
what
Ireland.
you might do if you don't vote for the deal. This is Theresa May's logic, isn't it? If you don't vote for the deal, and the EU's talking about granting extension on the basis of a vote for that deal. Without that, you've got no deal, and then you really have got a border problem.
Well, we don't have a border in the Irish Sea. Northern Ireland will still trade with Great Britain. I don't know any other democratic country in the world where there's a trade border in the middle of that country. And we're simply not going to accept that. Now, we do want to support a deal. We want to get a deal across the line. We are not trying to achieve a no-deal outcome. We recognise that it's in the best interests of the United Kingdom and the European Union that we get a withdrawal agreement. But we're not prepared to sign up for something that we believe will damage the integrity of the United Kingdom, will create a trade border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and also, interestingly, is contrary to the principles of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which says there will be no change in the status of Northern Ireland. This would fundamentally change the status of Northern Ireland, and we're not prepared to accept something that will do that. Yes, we want to avoid a situation where John and the people he represents are affronted by a hard border on this island. But equally, the people that I represent don't want a trade border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And therefore, we've got to achieve both. And this withdrawal agreement at the moment doesn't do that. So we're seeking legal assurances from the Prime Minister that the government will not allow that situation to pertain where there's a trade border created between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. If we can get those assurances, Fiona, then, yes, if they are clear and legal, then we will support an agreement. But that is the basis. We make no apology for representing the interests of Northern Ireland. John talked about the DUP. John talked about the DUP being in the middle of this. Where are Sinn Fein in this? They're not in Parliament. Their voice is not heard. They leave their people unrepresented and voiceless in the House of Commons. That is where Sinn Féin are. They are left out in the cold.
Can I just say, on a number of points, firstly, Jeffrey, you do not represent the majority of people here. 58% of the people here voted for Remain. When the DUP supported Brexit, they put trade barriers in place. When the DUP supported leaving the customs union and leaving the single European market, they put trade barriers in place. So you are masters of your own destiny in this regard. And in relation to Sinn Féin's voice being heard, I will quote no better than David Davies, the former Brexit minister, who said, I didn't realise the intensity of the game Sinn Féin would play in regards to this matter. So our voice has been heard in London, Dublin, and most importantly, it's been heard in Europe.
Let's hear some voices from our audience there. The woman in the glasses.
Last night, Theresa May went above the heads of MPs and directly appealed to the public. And for me, that was the first sign that the only way out of this impasse is to go back to the public, either through a general election or another vote, when people actually know what they're voting for. Her deal, Remain, or no deal. And her own desperation last night was evident.
So do you think that's what she meant? That she was appealing for a general election
no,
or a second referendum?
I mean, it's the only natural consequence of... She was so desperate, she was appealing to the public. Even though they're not voting next week, it's you guys. So, you know, I interpreted that as saying, well, Theresa, let's take it to the public. If you really want that, let's go back to the public and let's have a second referendum.
Let's take the woman in the glasses.
I just wanted to say that if the trade tariffs come in that were threatened, then there would be a border down the Irish Sea. She's made that clear in the new trade tariffs in a no-deal scenario. So first of all, just to straighten that one out. In the other circumstance, is it not correct that she could go to the Privy Council and just do away with all of this? All she has to do, go to the Privy Council, put the withdrawal deal through, and then you can all fight for 2 years about how the next round of trading goes. Could we not do that instead?
Or just overrule the lot of them?
Yes.
An interesting take on democracy. I'm not quite sure how that would go down.
Oliver Cromwell.
The man in the sweater there.
There seems to be the suggestions around the idea of a second referendum, but have we ever considered as to whether or not it would quarter the already divided half?
Yes, that's an interesting way of looking at it. We'll get into the fractions of that, but certainly we can talk to you about a second referendum. Let's hear from the woman here in the front of the glasses.
Basically, we heard from Jeffrey about the Good Friday Agreement, and really, I'm one of those people who don't identify as Irish nor British. The important thing on both of those passports is European Union. I am a European. I want to enjoy the rights I currently enjoy as a European citizen going forward. How can you on this panel assure me that that is going to happen, given my rights as a European citizen? And I want whatever my fellow citizens in Europe going forward enjoy. It's about rights. It's not about trade. Trade might be important, yes. However, I am one of a very small, marginalised group of people in Europe. We didn't gain any rights either in the Republic of Ireland nor the UK, except through the European Court of Justice. And really and truly, we want to maintain that going forward.
Thank you. The man in the check shirt.
Tobias said at the start that it was the MPs to make the decision. It wasn't the MPs to make the decision. The public made the decision. The MPs in government should be ashamed of themselves that they have no faith in their own country to go forward. The EU... We buy from the EU 3 times the amount they buy from us. In any business, you look after your good customer. They want a deal more than we do, but there are 27 people in a room that are never going to agree. In the history of the EU, their accounts have never been signed off for corruption, fraud. We're piling as the 3rd biggest people to put into that money. Every year we are putting in one of the biggest things. We put in 27 vetoes, of which only 3 were ever carried forward. The other 20-odd countries kicked us out. We've took on small countries that can't afford to pay their way within the EU, and they're increasing the pressure on the 3 big ones. Germany and France do not want the UK out because Germany and France are one of the 2 big countries trying to hold it together. And I think every MP should go beyond their own party politics and put the country first.
What would you like?
Personally, I think it would be a good thing to leave the EU. And I think...
So, in what term? In what terms?
If it has to go to WTO, we go to WTO.
I might point out that sounds like a lot of you clapping. It's actually only a handful, I must admit. But
the problem is, it is complex. There's no denying it. But at the same time, the government took the decision to have the referendum. And when you actually look at the figures of the people that voted, it works out almost a third didn't vote, a third did vote, and almost a third one way or the other. It's a few percent in it, although you can band out the figures here in Northern Ireland, 58% to remain. But when you look at the eligible people that could vote, just say over 1 million, it almost worked out a third, a third, a third. And the same in Scotland, same in Wales, and same in England.
I mean, how has it come to this, Tobias Ellwood? I mean, it's humiliating, is it not, for Theresa May to be at the EU today? I mean, we've heard a number of EU leaders talking of their sadness at seeing the UK in this position. How has a Conservative Prime Minister got us into this situation?
Getting us into this situation, this is a situation that, and it's been illustrated this evening by many, many, many factors. And some of them factors are things that would not change. The question that was originally put, where were we leaving to? We've illustrated that this evening, that there are so many different views. We've just heard one saying WTO terms. And I've came back to say that would be dangerous for Britain, but that received a bit of applause. Others are saying, let's have a second referendum. But would that honour the actual democratic outcome of the last one? And would you actually get the result that you want, or would it be 52-48 the other way around? This is the challenge that we actually face. And of course, WTO terms would lead to that border, potential border, being brought back here in Northern Ireland, which would not be good for this part of the world at all.
If it also closed down our
the biggest issue that we face is the fact that if we don't get this through to the line, we're actually alienating European partners. The lady in the front spoke about Europe. You know, European values, Western values are being eroded across the world. And we are alienating by potentially falling out on no deal with the very friends that we need to be working with to actually uphold the international values and the rules of law, which other countries are now walking right across. The world's changing fast around us, and we need to wake up to that. We need to get this deal across the line and recognise it is not perfect by any sense of the imagination. Absolutely not. But it does get us out of the fisheries policy, it gets us out of the agriculture policy, it stops us paying that money back into the EU each year, and does mean we can set up our own trade rules as well. But most importantly, it keeps a partnership, a deep partnership, which was in the Tory manifesto and in the Article 50 letter as well. Let's get this across the line. And sir, I plead with you to recognise we had that Brady Amendment, which did get through. OK, Parliament agreed on that. When the Brady Amendment, so there's one bit of the jigsaw which is preventing us from getting this across the line, and that is the backstop. We need to sort out that backstop. But once that's done, I hope you agree, Parliament will then support it. If we don't, we end up possibly bailing out of no deal or end up extending maybe for a couple of years. That cannot be in Britain's interests.
So, Nick, it looks like we're facing I mean, everything is so uncertain, to be honest, but as far as we can tell, it looks like we're facing a vote next week. What is Labour's movement in all this? There are a whole number of amendments that well, Nick is here and he will tell us. There are a whole number of amendments that Labour might support. It's unclear at the moment. But what's your priority in terms of your next move?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn has been out in Brussels today, Fiona, and he's been talking about an alternative deal. And I've been out saying this for months and months.
And what do you think that will be?
Right, it would be a comprehensive customs union, first of all, together with strong single market access, protections for rights, so that'd be workers' rights, environmental rights, and also, and crucially, and I say this...
but hang on, would we know all that? Because Jeremy Corbyn, in fairness, has been talking about that for some time. It hasn't garnered cross-party support, which it needs. So what's the thing that Labour's going to do next week? Of all the things you could go for, second referendum, there's talk about... I mean, there's so many different amendments. Common Market 2.0, there's Norway Plus, there's all sorts of things. There's going for a no-confidence vote. What is Labour's priority next week? It's a critical week next week.
It is a critical week, and I was just answering the question. The only additional point I was going to make is obviously the security position is also very, very important in this, because I was quite shocked as Labour Shadow Security spokesperson to read the political declaration to discover no reference, for example, to the SIS2 database, as it's known.
No, but hang on. But what are you going to go for next week?
I will answer the question, Fiona, just to say, the other thing that was a real problem was that issue, and nothing, for example, either on the European arrest warrant or the structures we need going forward, very important issue. But Those things that I have just suggested around the comprehensive customs union and the strong single market access, minds are now being concentrated. I still believe you can build a majority for that in Parliament. And the other crucial thing as well is, we're not asking the EU to reopen the withdrawal agreement. The EU are clear that they won't.
You're still not answering my question, Nick.
I am answering the question.
Am I missing it?
I'm answering the question.
Are you clear what Labour's priority will be next week?
We are pushing to build a majority in Parliament around those principles.
Yes, but so far that's not worked. So of the... OK. Well, let me give you some options then. So you could call for a general election, you have a vote of no confidence, and then, depending on that, call for a general election. Second referendum, that's still floating around. Various amendments, taking control back from Parliament, that's one, supported by one of your own MPs. There's an option for a sort of Norway-style deal. Which is it? Which is the one thing? Because it's next week. Which is the one thing that Labour is prioritising that people could focus around?
And again, the point I'm making is the only two realistic options left, and we've said this for months, is an alternative deal, and I've just tried to set out the pillars around that would be crucial, and the idea of a public vote. Those are the two things that we have set out. We will try to build a majority in Parliament, and there are different mechanisms for doing that. I mean, we supported, for example, the Ben Cooper-Bowles amendment in previous weeks, which just narrowly was defeated, which would have given a day when Parliament could actually have gone through the things that it could vote on. I think that would be a very good idea next week. But let me just be clear about this. It is to do with safeguarding jobs, livelihoods and security. The problem of the Prime Minister's deal is the political declaration is so vague. It talks about a spectrum of outcomes. It's essentially a blind Brexit. That can't be in the country's interest. What can be in the country's interest is a deal like this and building a majority in Parliament to get out of this crisis, because I'm afraid the Prime Minister herself is refusing to build that majority.
Polly?
Well, it just makes you lose the will to live, I think, because it's... It's almost impossible to tell what anybody means anymore when they're talking about Brexit. And I think it has brought out the worst in almost all of our politicians. And, you know, I worked in Parliament for the best part of 10 years. And, you know, I'm not one of those people who says politicians are all evil and they're on the take. They're not. They're good guys trying to do the best for their country. But somehow Brexit has just, like, sticking electrodes in their brain. And they've all gone mad. So people start talking nonsense. They're all talking up their own different unicorn Brexit, or I've got my jobs first Brexit, or my cousin. And none of it is possible. And Tobias is passionate about his deal, which would be great if it wasn't for the fact that it had been comprehensively defeated by 230 votes, then 150 votes. And now even people who voted for it are saying, I'm tired of it, I can't do this anymore because I'm being threatened and blackmailed. And I think the woman over there was completely right, that in the end, the only path to a solution has to be taking it out of the hands of those guys on the green benches because they are messing it up. And we can do that. We can do that with a people's vote. Say, look, this genuinely, as John was saying, this is actually the best deal you can get if you start with Theresa May's red lines, right? There's no other fantasy better deal. It's the best deal we can get. Are you sure you still want to go ahead? A kind of confirmatory referendum. That would be a reasonable way to put the people back in charge, which is what they deserve. The alternative, which Stella Creasy and a few others are arguing for, is actually what we've seen from the Republic of Ireland in deliberative democracy around some more kind of controversial cultural issues, is to say, actually, we're going to convene a citizens' jury, a citizens' convention, to decide this about Brexit, because this is a decision for the whole country. And we've tried the representative democracy method, which has, you know, stood Britain in good stead for 100 years. We've tried it. We've tried it to destruction, and it does not work for this.
Woman then.
Folks, this is incredibly depressing. Really, really, really depressing. Nothing new has been said by the panel with respect. The most awful thing is about to happen. Everybody's lives will change. Venezuela really is you just don't even go there. I mean, this is what the reality of a no-deal Brexit will be, and that's what's looking increasingly likely. Today, I think over 1 million people signed a petition to revoke Article 50. And I think that's probably maybe 1.5 million at the rate it was going now. I think that's probably very sensible. We're heading for a car crash. I think Article 50, revoking Article 50, is putting your foot on the brake. I think do that, stop the car, get out, assess the situation, maybe right back to the drawing board, right back to the beginning, whatever it has to be, but it's the only way to do it.
Young woman with the glasses. Young woman with the glasses there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Like, this is just so unbelievably depressing. I think the people who are clapping no deal, firstly, you should be ashamed because that's not the way to go. I also think that a second referendum probably isn't the way to go either because the only people pushing for a second referendum, people already voted for that in the first place. What's to say what's changed? What we need instead is a general election because you can let the parties put their policies back out there, tell them what their Brexit policy is, and let people vote for it that way. That's the reason people got involved with politics. That's not depressing. People like getting involved with general elections. That's what I got involved with politics. It's because I enjoy politics and I enjoy Jeremy Corbyn's politics. That's what got me involved as a young person. That's what's important. A general election, not a second referendum or no deal Brexit.
OK. Before we all feel terribly depressed, that's 2 people who said they're very depressed now. Who's not feeling depressed? That I could come to. Oh, don't all put your hands down. That would be just terrible. This man in the front, the striped shirt.
Yeah, I just think the Brexit process in general has highlighted a lack of effective leadership within politics in general in the UK. Tobias was saying at the beginning how there's different fractions, different groups within Parliament. Well, that's showing a lack of leadership from Theresa May, from Jeremy Corbyn and the other parties. That if the last few years has gone to show that it didn't happen early enough. Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, especially Jeremy Corbyn, actually should have gone and just said, look, we have our major differences, but this is for the interest of everybody. Everybody on the panel here has got their different opinions, but at the same token, EU are collective. And they hold the strong bargain position the whole time, which has made us to look really weak. And it's just, yeah, as I said, the lack of effective leadership.
OK, I'm going to move on from Brexit. Let's take a breather and move on from Brexit just for a moment. Before we do, I should tell you, Question Time comes from Sheffield next week, and the week after that we will be in Bolton. Call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience, or you can go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. So let's take our next question from David Duncan.
With the DUP and Sinn Féin still in deadlock, should the Northern Ireland Secretary of State resort to direct rule?
So this is a reference, of course, to the fact that the Northern Ireland Assembly has been suspended since January 2017. Geoffrey Donaldson?
I think we are moving towards the moment when a decision is going to have to be taken. As a Member of Parliament, I every day now encounter situations in my own constituency where people are losing out as a result of there not being a government in Northern Ireland. And we can't go on like this. My preference is to get Stormont restored. And in Northern Ireland today, we have 4 out of 5 political parties who have said, without preconditions, we will form an executive. Secretary of State, convene the Assembly tomorrow, and we will go into government without any preconditions. There is only one of the 5 parties, Sinn Féin, who are refusing to go into government. And it is wrong, in my opinion, in a democracy, that one party, representing maybe 25% of the people, is able to veto the establishment of a government. That is not democracy, and it has to change. But if we cannot get beyond this, if the Sinn Féin veto remains in place, then reluctantly, someone is going to have to start taking decisions. And in the United Kingdom, that is Westminster. And if that happens, and if we end up, John O'Dowd will talk about British rule in Ireland, well, the people responsible for the United Kingdom Parliament taking decisions about Northern Ireland will be Sinn Féin, the very party that says it's wrong. They will be responsible. So my appeal to Sinn Féin is, for goodness sake, whatever our differences are, we can sort them out around the table at Stormont, as we have done hitherto. We can sort out these issues. We can resolve them. The place to do that is the place that the people elected our representatives to go to Stormont, to take decisions, to take the tough decisions that need to be taken. But we cannot go on in a situation. We heard the question about blackmail. Well, it is wrong to blackmail an entire community and say you cannot have a government until we get our way. That is not the way that democracy should function. So I do think, in answer to the question, if we cannot get a government restored, and it is our priority and preference that we do, we want to be in government. Isn't it ironic that I, as a unionist, am saying I want to be in government with Sinn Féin and the other parties, and Sinn Féin are saying we don't want to be in government with the other parties? So, you know, that's a kind of measure of how things have changed in Northern Ireland, that it's actually the unionists who are arguing that we should be in government, and in government with people who we are opposed to, and they're opposed to us. But as Polly made the point earlier, we have managed to climb very high mountains in Northern Ireland. We've managed to overcome far greater difficulties in the past than the difficulties we now face. And the way we did it was through dialogue. The way that we did it was sitting down across the table. We need that now. We need Stormont back up and running. We need our own government. And if we can't get that, then the Secretary of State needs to start taking decisions for the good of the people of Northern Ireland.
John O'Down.
Well, firstly, let me correct Geoffrey on a number of matters and then go into the broader politics. 4 of the 5 political parties here are not ready to go back into government. And that is a stated fact. The SDLP, the Alliance Party, and the Ulster Unionist Party, and ourselves all have serious concerns about the direction of travel and where we need to rebuild the promise that was the Good Friday Agreement before we go back into a government. But let's refresh our memories, particularly for your viewers in Britain, as to why there is no government in Belfast at the moment. The government collapsed over 2 years ago, and Martin McGuinness, whose anniversary it is today, by the way, he's dead 2 years today, but it collapsed at a time, and this is related to the previous question. Brexit was the backdrop to it. There was a significant financial scandal at the heart of government, which the DUP were involved in. There was a denial of rights, of British and Irish rights, because your viewers in England and Scotland and Wales all have rights in relation to equal marriage. It's denied here. And who?
You're talking about same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is denied in this society because the DUP veto it. Your listeners and viewers in England and Scotland and Wales have language rights, particularly in Wales and in Scotland. They are denied here over the Irish language by the DUP. Geoffrey talks about a minority of people and elected representatives or a minority party holding people to ransom. As I said in my previous answers, 10 DUP MPs are holding the reputation and the future of Britain to ransom, and they're making a complete and utter change of it. And they will only ever be back in government in Belfast when the Good Friday Agreement, that internationally binding agreement, is implemented in full and people have access to the rights in this part of Ireland that you have in the rest of Ireland and in England, Scotland and Wales. And in relation to the question, should the Secretary of State implement British rule? No, Directorate. No, she shouldn't. The Secretary of State should implement the Good Friday Agreement. She is internationally bound by law to do so, and she has failed to do so because she's in hock to the DUP.
Well, so, I mean, as you can tell, I'm just a visitor here, and somebody said to me this morning, anyone who tells you they understand Northern Irish politics is lying. So I speak cautiously. But it does seem to me that the people of Northern Ireland are being let down by the lack of a government here, because whilst... whilst the civil servants continue to do the best that they can, there is nobody to sort out the hospitals and the schools and the waiting lists and drive the economy and grow the jobs and build the roads and make the decisions. And, you know, it's a reminder that actually government's quite a useful thing sometimes. And there does need to be a mechanism of compromise on both sides. And, you know, I just refuse to believe that parties that can negotiate the surrender of arms and a peace process cannot find common ground on all of this.
Man there in the grey shirt.
I think we've just seen from the finger-pointing between Sinn Féin and the DUP that they're not ready yet to get into government and that they're not mature enough to do that yet. Now, they managed to do that in 1997 under very difficult circumstances and they can't do it now, then they need to both grow up. And they both need to realise...
I think it's very grown up to defend people's rights. I personally believe that's very grown up. Why should citizens here who are gay be discriminated against? Why should citizens here who speak the Irish language be discriminated against? Is it grown up? Is that what grown up is? Because I missed that part.
I completely agree with you, and I think that I support gay marriage myself. However, I believe that at this crucial time in our history, the DUP and Sinn Féin both together need to find a way to come together and protect Northern Ireland. And I'm saying that as an English person who has just moved to Belfast. I think it's so important that you can find a compromise to get Stormont back up and running. But I think you're both to blame in this.
Well, there was a huge compromise, and it's been referred to a number of times. The Good Friday, just very quickly, the Good Friday Agreement was a huge compromise by unionism and republicanism. It needs to be implemented.
Young man there in the glass.
Hi, yeah. So you say that it's unacceptable for a 25% party to hold a veto on government, but it's also unacceptable for a 25% party or 30% party to misuse the petition of concern to stop people having equal rights. But it's possible. It also, if there is direct rule and if there is a no-deal Brexit, half the people here in Northern Ireland will feel like they have no representative anywhere. And that's where Mr O'Dowd's earlier answer on abstentionism just doesn't cut it. I know that you'll say that you have the mandate for it, but that's a circular argument. You say you have the mandate for it because you run on it, and then you run on it because you say that's what your mandate was. There's no principled justification for it anymore. Not if Bernadette Devlin or Daniel O'Connell could stand and take their seats in Parliament. The fact is, last week we saw votes on amendments being won or lost on a handful of votes, and 7 MPs could have changed how those turned out. And I don't think it's right or it's fair to go back, if there is direct rule and there is no deal, to go back to the communities which you say you represent and say, I'm sorry, because we didn't want to take an oath, which other Republicans like Tony Benn or members of the SDLP have done. And I also don't think it'll be any comfort at all to say that if we do end up going back to the bad old days. And I don't mean to take up too much time, but it does make me question whether you really do want the institutions here to work, or whether you think a functioning executive and a functioning assembly would pose too big of a block to a united Ireland.
No.
Jeffrey said you need to be in Stormont to take the big decisions. Two of the biggest mistakes, or the worst decisions ever made, when both parties were in Stormont. One, the RHI scandal, and second was welfare reform, PIP and universal credit, both supported by parties sitting next to you.
Let's hear from the woman in the red shirt.
As a taxpayer of Northern Ireland, when is my money going to stop being wasted on people who will not do their jobs? As an employee of a company in Northern Ireland, if I don't attend work, I get fired. So when is this going to stop? The Secretary of State needs to actually have a bit of courage and say, you either go to your work or you don't get paid, or we get a new set of politicians who will sit down with each other, will actually make some decisions and actually run the country, and stop with the politicians that just won't go to work. It's a disgrace. You are all being a disgrace.
Well, it has been over 2 years, and can I just say that the passion and the energy in this room that is calling out for, democratically elected local government to return to this place is profound, and I do hope that the members here will recognise that. I served here in the 90s. I remember what it was like. And it is such a pleasure every time I come back here to walk around the waterfront here in Belfast and other places to see the transformation that has taken place. Everybody can be extremely proud of that. But we've also just signed in Parliament, we just approved another extension to the civil service, that Northern Ireland Civil Service continue doing the work that elected members of the Assembly should be doing. So I do hope that the passion that is here this evening is heard elsewhere and further along to say, let's get back to this, get this Assembly back and running and make the decisions, because there are two big decisions I can think of which need to be considered, and they can only be considered by a devolved administration.
I'm someone who is so impressed and an admirer of the Good Friday Agreement and the impact that it had. In fact, my predecessor as the Member of Parliament for Fein, Paul Murphy, actually chaired the talks process. And, of course, the Stormont institution was an integral part of that. It was the Northern Irish bit, if you like, of that agreement. And I would very much like to see there to be a restoration of the institution. But it also seems to me, looking from outside, that if you look at the 1990s and you look at the peace process right from 1998 up to 2007 when the institution began, it seems to me that whenever there was an impasse, you had the Prime Minister taking a huge interest and really prioritising. I mean that for both parties, actually, John Major, Tony Blair. And what I would like to see is actually at the very top, the Prime Minister herself come, take an interest in this, really push this forward and get the institution restored.
Woman there in the green top.
The thing what strikes me now, I'm a European, which will be majorly shafted by Brexit, but that's another topic. So I give you another view here. First of all, we are focusing too much on the two big parties. There are loads of other parties, and it's about time that maybe people vote for them and not the big parties. I think we need another election because maybe Brexit has sharpened people's minds. And of course, what we also need, and I look at the Labour MP here, that Labour finally get their act together and stand here because they have denied us that right.
Woman there.
I think there's a couple of issues here. One, we've got extremist politicians in Northern Ireland, and it's about time the people of Northern Ireland stopped voting for this nonsense and started voting for a party that represents them, that represents them in Stormont and represents them in Parliament. Second, is it about time to stop this extremist politicians getting in Northern Ireland, that we talked about proportional representation, so that everybody can have their voice heard? Right now, no one is speaking for me.
Well, we do have proportional.
The man in the green top there.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, how can we expect the British government to act as independent co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, considering they're in bed so close with the DUP?
Jeff, I'm going to come to you in a minute, if that's all right. One there in the sweater.
I would just like to say, as a young person who was born the year after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, I've thoroughly enjoyed the peace and all the opportunities here, and I would just like to agree with the man who spoke before me that it would be highly irresponsible. Yes, I agree, maybe the Prime Minister should come and get things back running, but it's highly irresponsible to suggest that direct rule is the way forward when we need to represent both sides. We have a very unique situation, and it's been shown by English MPs, even by Welsh MPs, that they don't know the intricacies here. Like Polly said, you don't understand it. We need to take control here ourselves, and I trust we can do that. We just need to push. That's what I think.
A lot of views, Jeffrey Donaldson, coming from the floor, not least an impassioned plea to just get the Assembly up and running and cause a compromise on both sides. You've laid the blame firmly and solely at the feet of Sinn Féin. Is there anything that you feel the DUP could be doing?
If the Secretary of State calls the Assembly tomorrow, we will be there and we will go into government. I can't be any clearer than that. And I agree with you, absolutely, that I believe in devolution. I believe that we are better served by having our local representatives in Stormont doing the job that we elected them to do. That is absolutely crucial.
And do you think they should be taking their salaries given that they're not doing it?
Well, the point has been made, and the Secretary of State has already reduced twice now the salaries of the Assembly members. And that's why I do think, in answer to the original question, that we probably are approaching the point within the next few months, if we can't get Stormont back up and running, where we need decisions made. We need ministers taking decisions. Now, I want those to be local ministers. I want them to be the political parties that the people of Northern Ireland elected, getting on with the job of delivering. So I hope that when we get a dialogue, and we do need to have a dialogue, we need to be talking and getting decisions made and getting Stormont back up and running. The DUP is up for that. We want to do that. We want to get a functioning Assembly and Executive, and the sooner the better. That is absolutely clear.
And who in the audience here can give an example of how their life is affected by the fact that the Assembly isn't up and running? In fact, you've got the civil service running things here. Yes?
As a teacher, we don't have the luxury of having these sort of debates. Now, I completely agree with John in the sort of right situation, and I feel passionately about that. But as someone working on the front line with young people, it's really devastating to see them come into situations where we're struggling to provide resources, and we don't have time. They're sitting their A-levels or GCSEs now. When else are we going to get behind public servants and back them? Because at the end of the day, we don't have time to have this argument. It's happening day to day, and they're suffering day to day. And we want to do the best for the kids we have, but we need help to do it.
Man in the top chair.
It's for the people of Northern Ireland to start putting their support in the smaller parties that will probably come together and do it. And for Jeffrey, just very quickly, would he be willing to go back into Stormont, removing the petition of concern first?
Yeah, I think that we do need to address those issues, but the place to do them is in the Assembly, is by consensus, by getting the political parties sitting down together. We have said on the record that we believe the petition of concern does need to be reformed. And we're prepared to sit down with the parties and do that. But the place to do it is Stormont. So let's get the Assembly back up and running where we can address these issues. There is no issue we are not prepared to look at, but we need a forum in which to do it, and that is the Assembly.
But weren't those issues already supposed to be dealt with years ago when the Good Friday Agreement and St Andrews Agreement? I thought them issues were supposed to be dealt with, but you've been putting them on the long arm.
It is on. The work is ongoing. The peace process, in terms of, well, for example, if you take, and one of the reasons I had a difficulty with the agreement originally was because it didn't address some of the hard issues. If you look at, for example, the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, we're still trying to sort that out. Why? Because it wasn't sorted out in 1998.
Okay. So I think we're slightly
I agree with you, but the place to do this is Stormont. Let's get our politicians back into the Assembly and take these decisions.
John O'Dell, we're nearly out of time, but let's hear from you.
Well, I find it somewhat ironic that MPs who are currently involved in the turmoil of Westminster are telling local politicians they need to get their act together, because I can throw that back at them, because there's currently no British government, there's only a government name. But whether I'm paid or not paid isn't the issue. Do I accept politicians? Some people think politicians should be kept on a diet of water and bread. Now, that's fair enough. Our wages have been cut by 27%. If they're cut again, that's fair enough. If they're stopped, that's fair enough. But the reality is this, folks. Without a fundamental change in direction of the DUP and the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, Stormont isn't coming
John,
back.
it takes all of us. It's not just the DUP. It takes all of us. It takes all the parties, John. Building a consensus is about all of us.
Let me just make a final point. And in relation to your comments around education and health service and all those things, is absolutely right. But let's have some reality. If the executive in Stormont was back tomorrow, there's no extra money in the system to give out to public services, because just like England, Wales and Scotland, we are suffering from Tory and DUP austerity.
I somehow feel that if we all just pull back, we could just let you two... Anyway, I will have to end it there because I'm afraid our hour is up. Our next programme is in Sheffield, when we may not be on the eve of Brexit. Who knows? Come what may, we will be joined by the former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. He's had his run-ins with the EU, let's face it. Be interesting to hear from him. And the boss of Next, Simon Wilson. And the following week, we will be in Bolton. Call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience, or go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. And, of course, if you want to have your say on tonight's topics, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is starting on 5 Live now. But for now, thank you very much to my panel. Thank you very much to my audience here for coming tonight, spending your time with us, and, of course, to you at home from watching. From Belfast, bye-bye.
Is the PM gaining or losing support in Westminster? Chris Mason and Laura Kunsberg have the latest. Listen to Brexit Cast by downloading the BBC Sounds app without delay.